Let's keep them guessing.
Hi everyone, I'm here to walk you through Command & Conquer, the released and almost public free-to-play AAA RTS. The NDA on the game has been lifted for a while now, so all the knowledge I'm about to drop is all above board. I wanted to make this video as a sort of portfolio piece that demonstrates some of the highlights of the game, so that there's some semi-definitive record once the servers are finally taken down. As of the time of this recording, it's about 3 weeks after Victory Games was executed, and the servers are still running. People are still playing and enjoying the game. So I captured these games just a few days ago. Anyways, what you see here is our game as of the mid-month of October balance patch. We were set up to have 2 major updates per month, a balance and bug fix patch mid-month, and a big content patch at the end of each month. Victory got the axe the day the October content patch was supposed to be released, so unfortunately this build is about a month behind on features and content. What you're seeing in the clip here is a 1 vs 1 game I played online, where I'm the GLA General Junkyard, and I'm fighting the APA General Red Arrow on a low economy map called Red Zone. My enemy opened up with a command center first. This was a mechanic we were toying with that added a strategic layer to the game. Unlike other RTS games, CNC lets you open by building combat units very quickly. So because it's so quick, scouting with ground units isn't a viable way to gather information and respond to it. So the game reveals your structures when you don't have a command center. Therefore, the decision of when to build a command center is an information game. Since I did not build one early, I basically telegraphed what I was doing to the enemy. Since my opponent built his first, I basically have no free information about his plans, so what's going on here is my scouting and harassment with a few GLA technicals. I do know that he sunk 1,000 supply into a building and not on units, so that's why I pushed those technicals out right away to try and do some harassment. So I'm just microing them around the base, trying to figure out what he's doing. See a barracks in the back there, and I think I can take out one of the harvesters just to be annoying or anything else. Buy a little bit of time while I get my game together. So the command center feature I was talking about, the community took to calling it a fog hack, since while it accomplished what we were after in terms of giving people early information while maintaining a very fast time to unit, it's pretty kludgy, and with no UI feedback, how it works isn't really apparent. I'll talk about how we were improving the early information game a bit later when I talk about the October content patch and the December content patch that we were planning. Back at my base, I've got 2 barracks and a war factory, so I'm pretty well set up to make units to play safely. At the same time, I've got some construction units going to the middle of the map to take some more oil wells. And I put down my command center here. The idea is that once the command center is up, I will have disabled my opponent's fog hack. And so I'm going to synchronize building more oil and an expansion on the far left. So once that command center is up, those won't show up on my opponent's map at all. My opponent grabbed the far oil on the bottom right of the map and he's beefing it up with some flame turrets. So I'm guessing this means he intends to take the expansion in the bottom right as well. I am getting impatient. Fortifying this choke point. So as for me, as soon as my command center is up, I start to put down my supply center here. So I'm going pretty heavy on the economy. I think I'm going to be up on my opponent money-wise. I start pumping terrorists out of my 2 barracks, and I put down a salvage lab. Salvage lab for GLA lets me specialize the war factory into a salvage factory, as opposed to a toxic factory, so that's sort of a diverging thing I can do. So one of my technicals got blown up by the flame turrets, so I send the other one down just to try and find out when we're actually trying to build an expansion. Back in the top left, I'm putting down a rocket nest. Decided to put it close to my expansion just in case he brings some early air or some sort of cheap harassment by. At this point, as far as I know, he's completely unaware of my expansion. So I decided to get a little greedy. I have a nice big army of those terrorists there. Terrorists are self-destructing units that are very good against armor. It's sort of my counter to tanks. I'm assuming that my opponent is going for tanks here. That's one of the Rocket General's strengths.
See them yet?
I need to find a little more information along those lines, so I sent my very damaged forward tactical to harass this construction unit.
We are busy.
Over there. I make a play, an early play for some of these other oil fields here. Since my commands are done, you can't see these.
Let's keep using powers.
Map, so I'm hoping that they'll be out long enough to pay for themselves. There's a helicopter and an airfield, so my opponent is actually going air, which is bad news for me since I have an all-ground army here. I built a Marauder tank, and I've got these terrorists. So I immediately switch gears and start pulling out some of my rocket snipers, rocket squad, stealth guys, and the quad cannons, which are basically specialized anti-air sort of flak gun trucks. Yeah, there are those two Mantis helicopters. They're very potent air-to-ground units. They don't have an air-to-air attack though. I put down a Stinger sight next to my rocket nest, so I don't have to worry about his aircraft sniping my expansion. And then back at my base, I'm starting to crank out the quad cannons to augment my ground force. So there are his two Mantises. They're going around taking out my oil.
You're just full of
So I try to get a quad cannon down there to defend the wall. Take out that oil rig, but they're not going to stick around. That quad cannon will just chew through them if they do. So scared them off, mission accomplished. Back at my main base. You can see I put a lot of money into terrorists since my opponent is able to build some beefy anti-armor units. But given that my opponent's going heavy air, I start cranking out some quad cannons, and I queue up a radar van also. Radar van's a caster unit with specialties, defensive specialties like smoke screen. It can lay mines, and it can be upgraded to use an ability called Skynet, which is good at slowing down and damaging air units. So back at the expansion, I was getting that up and running, and my workers that were out on the map laying down the oil wells are very vulnerable, so I start putting them around to garrison structures. So my army's looking pretty good over here. I know those Mantis aircraft are expensive, so I think I'm going to do a push here. I queue up a couple extra rocket soldiers just for some base defense, and then I drag select my whole army and I send it down. So I use an intelligence gathering ability off the command center called GPS Scrambler, which is a dual purpose scan and blind. But I cast it down at his oil rig to see if he had one, and he did. So that's where I'm going to send my small harassment force while my main army starts to head down towards his expansion, which he had fortified with a couple of those flame turrets. Now I start to move my army into position. My terrorists have charged out front, and I don't really want them to go into those flame turrets alone. The radar van's there for some backup, and my heavier hitting units are behind them. So I really want my stealth rocket soldiers to get in that structure so they get a little bit of range bonus. It doesn't look like they outrange that turret though, which is unfortunate since the plane will shoot into the building. But that tank is very well suited against flamethrowers, so I definitely put it in front. There are those two Mantis copters. So this is where I need those rocket soldiers to come in, but they're getting taken out quickly. They do have one quad cannon back there though, and that should be more than enough to scare them off. Most of my terrorists I end up running in anyway, just so I can do some damage. So my radar van then pops a smoke screen, which prevents that Mantis from doing any more damage. Those airplanes were my opponent's spy sortie, which is his vision power. So he wanted to see if I had an army back there behind that to threaten his expansion. I didn't. So that fight was kind of a wash. But even so, I figure I'm way ahead on the money, so I go back to my base and start producing. And then I also figure he's probably grabbed the other oil well next to his main base, so I send a unit to go harass that. I think it's time to start building some more vehicles, so I put down another war factory, and that's a toxin lab there. I really want the Shadow Cloak upgrade from the Toxin Lab. It adds stealth to the terrorists, which help them close the distance. And stealth terrorists are pretty cool if your opponent doesn't have a whole lot of vision. Vision in this game is mainly provided in 3 ways. So everyone has their scan power from their command center. Turrets can also see stealth units, and caster units all have vision as well. So my radar van, for example, can see stealth units from quite long range. A few units here and there also have abilities that let them reveal or see stealth units. So I'm doing really well on the money, so it's time to start cranking out some heavy hitters. I queue up a Stinger missile, a mobile Stinger launcher, which is like a sort of a heavy anti-air, anti-ground artillery. Looks like my opponent held on to his oil well. He garrisoned some napalm mortar soldiers in that structure who have some pretty crazy range, but my blast rocket guy is able to stand right outside it, take out his construction unit, and then that oil well should go down soon. Hopefully, yeah, I think his helicopter is a little too scared to come down and engage me. So, back to base. Now that my Toxin Lab's done, I upgraded that second war factory to be a Toxin factory. That lets me build Toxin choppers. Toxin choppers aren't very strong, but they can shoot other air units, which my opponent's helicopters cannot. So I figure he's not going to see that coming. That should let me take his air force blindsided. My Shadow Cloak is done. So now my terrorists are stealth. So I start to research Skynet, which is that cool offensive ability for the radar man. So at this point I'm getting my army up to size. I figured it's a good time to start a 3rd base. So that worker that I had hiding in that big hotel looking thing, pop him out and get him to start building another supply center. My army is looking pretty good, cranking out Toxin choppers at a respectable rate, have 2 barracks and a salvage factory all making units. So, and there are those 2 or 3 Mantis helicopters out there. Those are expensive, and I have a good amount of anti-air here, so I figure it's time to head out and see if I can intercept them before they see my my 3rd base that's under construction. So my 2 Toxin choppers intercept those Mantis helicopters, and they start to pursue. The Mantis copters can't do anything. They don't have anything to shoot other air units. And then here comes my army right behind them. Hopefully he didn't see my army, so I can set up a pretty devastating attack on his main base without him being able to get his units in place. Back at the base, I'm continuing to crank out Toxin choppers and terrorists. I figure with enough terrorists, I could probably level his base no matter what he has in it. So I'm just gonna have a little fun here. And that'll be an interesting assault with a lot of stealth terrorists pouring into his base. My general is level 3, which means he doesn't have his big base cracking power yet. The nuclear liberation, that power shows up at level 4. But I'm guessing during the course of the next invasion, or next engagement, I'll gain enough experience to unlock that. So he has a couple napalm mortars in that structure, but he's clearly outgunned. I just send everything I have in there. A couple terrorists get close enough, and pop that building. So at this point he knows I'm here. They're those Mantis copters. I have a lot of anti-air though. So I pop some smoke screens from my radar van. Those Mantis just cannot touch me, which clears the way for me to push up his ramp. So I send a couple Toxin choppers down to harass his expansion base. All he has are those Mantis copters, so I don't think he's going to be able to stop me from killing all of his workers. I drop a sabotage player power onto his structure. It's just an anti-structure timed bomb, which is unique to the GLA. Back at the base, doing a little more macro. I'm going to crank out some heavy tanks. Those Marauder tanks are pretty cool. They're an homage to the Marauder Tanks in General's 1, where they start off as sort of these little, basically treaded armored cars, but as they kill units on the battlefield, they upgrade with the scrap from the units that they destroy. I think my opponent sold his base, his expansion base, because he couldn't do anything about my toxin choppers. So at this point, I drop a GPS scrambler at the top there. See a bunch of his units laying there, so I just pop down nuclear liberation. This is what it's for. It's a base crafter. So I just waste half of his defenses. You'll notice how I spread out my army out here. Usually a good idea to keep your armies away from each other as much as possible in this game, as the high tier player powers can wipe out like a normal big death ball if you group them all together. So I cast Skynet up the ramp to give me vision and also do some damage against the structures. He does use his high tier player power right as my units get up the ramp. Oh no, I'm sorry. That was his general's player power, which was sort of a stun damage ability. So that's not so bad. So at this point, I send in my terrorists and just let him go. He's pretty well entrenched, but he wasn't paying attention when I dropped my high tier player power. So my stealth terrorists are just in here. I'm letting them do what they want. There's the toxin bomb player power that I borrowed from the toxin general via the arsenal system. And my units are going to clean this up. The arsenal system is what we call a monetization drain. Basically, it lets you allocate a portion of your earned currency winnings in exchange for slotting the player power of another general. Since this new player power shares the cooldown of your actual general's player power, we felt that this was actually a cool system that promotes a little more diversity of play while giving our monetization group another knob to turn. So yeah, I've got a lot of units just queued up. There's 5 toxin choppers are on their way, and I'm just gonna clean them up here. So that should wrap it up here, unless he has something secret hidden away. Oh, he was attacking my main base with some Mantis copters, but my Stinger missile turret up there just made short work of those. This command center is not long for the world, and the GLA are victorious. Look at that. Alright, good game, Alpha player. Thanks for playing. Okay, what I want to do now is go over where we were with the build that I'm playing right now. Let's go through the generals and their kits real fast. We iterated quite a bit on the concept of the generals, and I'll talk about what we were intending to do with them for our public release a little later. So this is the Ghost EU Recon General. As you see, each general has his own set of units. Many of them are shared with the other generals. The Recon guy had a Predator drone UAV as his special player power. This is Beast, the Urban Combat General. He has a tear gas power, which does buffs your units and debuffs enemy units. He has some unique units, such as the Urban Combat Infantry. This is Mercury, the EU Rapid Assault General. His player power is Bulwark. He has Shock Troopers, which are sort of elite rifle squads. They have a charge ability and a flashbang for clearing garrisons. This is Dr. Thrax, the GLA Toxin General. He can use that toxin bomb that I showed before, and then he has more of the chemical-oriented units for GLA. So here's Junkyard. That's the general I was playing in the game earlier. His player power is Faulty Construction, which causes enemy units to misfire, so when they attack, they do damage to themselves. His units are sort of themed along these cobbled together, sort of welded GLA crazy things like the battle bus and their main battle tank. The APA Rocket General is Red Arrow. Her player power is Thunderclap, which is sort of a sonic boom type stunning rocket. Her army is predominantly ground based. She has the tank busters and the rocket tank, so she's a really solid backbone army general. Next up is Tactician. He's the GLA Classic General. His player power is Sandstorm. Sandstorm teleports his units to the nearest friendly structure. He also has a baseline army, which is pretty versatile, good at just about anything. Just like the EU Classic General here, Bulldog. His player power is Cyber Command, which is another sort of spell-like buffing, debuff combo player power. Next up is the APA Classic General. This is Taskmaster. This player powers offshore bombardment, which is a sort of direct damage artillery strike. He has a pretty standard APA army, not a whole lot of air units. This is 1,000 Suns, the APA Atomic General, so he's very different than the others in that he does not have any infantry other than the commander. So he's an all-vehicle-based general. He would have been really good when Crushing was in. I'll talk about that later. This is the APA Espionage General, Blackjack. He was a new general for this patch. So he has this, we introduced the stealth tank with him, and he has a combination of very unique tanks like the flame tank and a few other cool units like the saboteurs. So this is Inferno, the Pyro General. This guy was going to see some major revisions in later patches, which I'll talk about in a bit, but he was typically flame based. This is the Air Force General. He calls in the air raid with his player power. And he has all the helicopters. He was going to benefit quite a bit from the fixed wing aircraft that we're going to add later, and I'll talk about that in a bit too. Here's the EU Experimental Weapons General. Gets the laser tank, the assault APC, the shock troopers. So he gets a lot of the tweaked special high-tech units from the EU Army. This is Cleaver, the Railgun General. So she has plasma bomb attack. She has the railgun troopers. She doesn't have any basic infantry, so she's a little different in that she doesn't actually build the basic barracks even. This is Nitro. Nitro has all the suicide units, the terror technical, the nuke truck, the terrorists, all the explosive themed units in GLA. This is the GLA Engineer General, also the most recently introduced in this build. He has the EMP truck and some of the other high-tech stuff. And lastly, this is Wild Dog, the GLA Marauder General. This guy has an RPG strike where he calls in like 50 different rockets from across the map that land in a very large area. So that's pretty much it for the general review. Now I'll talk a little bit about the metagame and the perk system. The perk system was another one that we iterated on a lot. What I'm showing you here is what we called Perks 2.0. Perks 3.0 was part of our October patch, so I'll talk about that once I get to the October patch section. I had a lot of fun naming the perks, but the system was pretty clearly a hack. So on the video, I'm just going through, mousing over all the perks so you can see the names and sort of what they do. And while I'm doing that in the video, I'll go ahead and tell you why Perks 2.0 was such a hack. So Perks 1.0, we started off as a sticker sheet approach, where basically you level each faction independently, and as you level, these different perks become available to you. Once you have unlocked all of the perks for your faction, you'd basically be at the top of the level. You'd have all the perks unlocked. Every time you played any general of that faction, you'd get all those perks. And the way that this was balanced, the perks were originally implemented via a subtractive mechanism. So there was the baseline balance of the game, and then when we created these perks, let's say we made a perk that gave your tanks +2 armor. If you didn't have the perk, it would take the baseline of the game and it would subtract 2 armor from the baseline of the game. So at level 1, you're basically seeing a cross-the-board nerf of the entire faction. So balance-wise, this wasn't really that big of a deal though, because we match you against players of similar level. So everyone sort of goes into the games with the same handicap, and by the time you're max level, you have them all unlocked, and it's an even playing field. But still, that system wasn't very satisfying, so we never actually released it. So instead, we jumped onto Perks 2.0, which is this one. Perks 2.0, you actually buy and then slot your perks per faction. So the perks are broken up into 4 different categories. There's Command, Conquer, Control, and Global. And the perks are themed differently for each faction in each category. Global, you would unlock them for all the factions once you buy them. But each of the other 3 categories are faction specific. So what I'm mousing over here are the Conquer series of perks for the GLA. Once, let's say I had bought this level 3 extremism right there, I could then slot that for any general once I have unlocked it. But this one didn't really give us a lot of the stickiness or customization progression that we were looking for. So we had just finished up working on Perks 3.0, which was going to be unleashed with the October patch. The way Perks 3.0 works is that you basically, we did away with the faction leveling. So you level the generals specifically. Each level, we were going to start off with 5 levels. And as you level each general, you would just have 4 or 5 perk slots on that general. And each general would have access to about 8 or 9 perks. And those perks were unique per general. We got rid of the subtractive system, so everyone started off with the regular baseline of the game, and the perks, since there were so few of them, became additive. So whenever, let's say you had a perk that gave your tanks +2 armor, you would then take the normal tank armor value that everyone had and just add 2 onto it, which is more intuitive and a lot more in line with how the perk system should have been. So Perks 2.0 is definitely a Frankenstein of the old system that came before it, but Perks 3 was actually shaping up to be pretty cool. Now I'll spend some time talking about where the game was going to be were it to go public in February. First of all, to be clear, the game used the client server model. Our servers were all cloud-based and set up to scale with the number of users. Obviously, the game turned into free-to-play, but I'd like to stress that it was never ever going to be pay-to-win as long as victory was involved. None of us on the team like pay-to-win games, and we never had any intention or direction to make it pay-to-win. I've seen some pretty spiteful comments on the internets that assumed because EA was involved that somehow they were forcing us to make it pay-to-win, but this was never the case, and anyone who tells you otherwise was simply misinformed. As I mentioned earlier, we had a patch going out the day that the studio was shut down, and this was one of our large end-of-month content patches. So actually there was an incredible amount in this patch, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about what was in it and what we had actually accomplished here. First off, as you might have noticed in the last video, the unit movement could be a little janky at times. I won't go into all the constraints our engineers were over, but they were making good progress on the problem, and the October patch had a big incremental quality improvement on the movement system. They actually had introduced a vehicle turn radius, a general movement smoothing, and some unit responsiveness fixes on this first big improvement. The EU tech tree became more interesting with this patch. The #1 community ask from the start for this project was for a crushing mechanic where vehicles can kill infantry by running over them. We had originally deprioritized this feature because no one on the team really championed it. However, it was a great example of how our team leadership made an effort to please the loudest of the community desires. Another big ask from some of the CNC grognards was to have the command center first, like in the old Generals game. We did put this in the October patch, but I suspect the newer community members would have petitioned us to take it out again. Turned out that all the good players were just selling their command centers to build them later anyway, mimicking the system we had in place before. But I guess we'll never know how that would turn out. The new systems and improvements were coupled with quite a bit of content. So this patch released 2 new generals. The ongoing plan, by the way, was to introduce 2 new generals a month. So these were the Horde General and the Artillery General. For this specific patch, we had 2 new units and 2 new structures going out with the generals. The HUD, like the in-game interface, had its icons and buttons reworked, so the new art style looked a lot more professional and less placeholder. There was another take on the Onslaught mode, which we had released earlier in the alpha. And the AI actually had some improvements with AI-specific generals. And so this would make skirmishing more fun and more interesting, as you would have a different experience based on the general you were playing against. So here's a picture of the HUD art, the new HUD art in the onslaught mode actually. So the UI indicators like the wave complete are totally stylized up, as you can see. On the bottom right, you can look at the ability and unit portraits to see the new style that we were going for here. This was the only image of the new HUD I could find that was released, but each faction had a specific style that was going along with them, and it was a big improvement over what came before. The onslaught mode is basically a horde holdout mode with specific generals as opponents. So this one is a two-player holdout against the Nitro General. So you'd have to hold off against her explosive themes. So as I mentioned earlier, the new perks system tightened up our progression system. You no longer were going to level each faction, but instead you leveled each general. Each of the perks was defined on a per general basis as well, and were implemented in a much more balanced friendly way. This is a screen capture from that new mode with the new artillery general featured here. And here's a look at the new EU tech tree. The big changes to the EU faction were the transformation of the Tech Lab and Advanced Tech Lab to the War Lab and the Air Lab. So we basically took these tech labs out of series and put them in parallel. Air rushes were a problem in the previous build, and it was never entirely clear when or why you would build the Advanced Tech Lab, so this war versus air delineation felt way better in practice. Muerta, the GLA Horde General, was our Halloween-themed content. She brought with her the El Diablo cannon truck. We called it the bunny tank internally because it was so cute in motion. She had a player called Ambush, where she spawned in elite rifle squads out of a sneak attack tunnel, and she was generally a very popular general with our internal playtests. Salvo, the EU artillery general, was the other October general. He brought a lot to the game with the rocket artillery unit, buildable bunkers, and a howitzer stationary artillery piece. His player power was called Suppressing Fire and was the first directional player power. Basically, you used it to call in a series of artillery strikes that crept forward, allowing his units to advance behind it. So that pretty much describes what was in the October content patch. So while we had discrete releases for content and balance, the feature improvements we were making were ongoing. Design-wise, we were finally able to put effort into making the factions and generals more unique. We had 4 or more new units coming in each month. The player interface was due for an iteration, and the combat system and unit abilities were constantly improving. Most importantly, the movement and pathfinding overhauls were beginning to filter into the game. The extent of how this improved the look of the game in motion can't be overstated. So 3 simple ways that we were planning to make each faction more different was by implementing a new take on 2 of the systems in Generals 1, the China Horde bonus and the GLA scrap system. The EU power system was finally getting another pass too. At the start of our open alpha, or at the start of our closed alpha, it was a Protoss style proximate power system. The revision we were planning before our open beta was to revisit the system, making it less restrictive, and all carrot, no stick reason to build power plants. Alright, on to generals differentiation. So the way generals worked in the current build was just a foundation for what we were building out for the public release. Each general was getting more unique mechanics, unique perks, and tech tree tweaks. We were cranking out new units that were retroactively making their way into older generals' armies, with the goal of making each general's army composition really unique and different. These static generals images down here were getting replaced with fully animated 3D busts, which added quite a bit of character to each of the generals. So here's an example of the unique per general mechanics we were shooting for. This is Ghost, the EU Recon General. So for Ghost, we were giving his units the Lone Wolf bonus. So this is sort of the opposite of the Horde bonus. With the Lone Wolf bonus, his recon units would get a vision and movement speed bonus when they were alone on the field, when they weren't near other units. Ghost was giving his units and his teammates' units vision range increases across the board. His rifle infantry would stealth when they were standing still, and whenever he used his UAV spy drone or his UAV Reaper drone, he was going to get manual control of those scout units rather than just having them circle in one place like they do for all the other generals. And here's a preview of his 3D talking head bust. These added so much personality and so much of a high quality feel to the front of the game. Well, I'll let this guy speak for himself. The voice actors did an incredible job.
Must be some weak structures. Take them all out. How come no one reads books anymore? Are games really that fun? Every human organ has a plethora of weak points. Would you like to see yours? Invisibility is my ally. How can you defeat what you can't see?
Here's another example of how we were differentiating the generals. This is Inferno, the APA Pyro General. So Inferno's flame units would explode when they were crushed. He would trigger firestorms more easily than other generals. His units would be damage resistant to firestorms. His artillery units start with the flame shot, and the flame shot would no longer be available for other generals. And his bombers, once we had put in the fixed-wing aircraft, would have been armed with napalm. And here's an example of some of his talking head performances. I really love this guy's performance. He has so much personality.
My friend built that tank just for us. Then I burned him. Those men will burn before they surrender. We'll all become ashes sooner or later. I'm just speeding up the process. Those weren't strong enough. It's dry out here. What can we burn first? I don't hear any sirens. Quick, let's start the fire.
Looking forward to our public release, some of the big-ticket gameplay improvements were extensions to the combat system. Turrets on the tanks were going to be simulated, so you could actually take a fast unit and micro behind tanks to kill them without taking damage. The Gatling spin mechanic was making a comeback from Generals 1, and we were about to have a way for a single unit to have multiple weapons that function independently, like the Overlord tank with the Gatling upgrade on it. Both the turret and the Gatlings would acquire different targets. The directional player power targeting was about to get extended to a lot of the older powers as well. So they wouldn't all just be circle powers. There would be a lot that you could actually aim, such as the air raids and the spy drone powers. And of course, due to the nature of game development, there would have been hundreds of other fixes and improvements as well over the coming months. Alright, let's spend a little time talking about the per milestone releases leading up to the public beta. So the November content release was a fairly standard content with 2 generals and 4 units. Generals were the APA Explosives Theme General and the GLA Hit and Run General. The APA Explosive General was going to bring out his robotic recon vehicle, which was sort of a bomb disposal tied with a pilotless drone. Their heavy grenade tank was a massive Overlord alternate. The GLA were bringing in the police cruiser, or the 5.0 as we like to call it. This was like a auctioned off Ford Crown Victoria with the lights and everything that the GLA converted en masse into combat units. And finally, the GLA Juicer was like this amped up GLA melee guy. He was like this big WWF wrestler or something with big big super-powered hammer and some armor he would charge into the front lines with. So the December release was going to see a truckload of units and a new PvP map. This month was going to see the planned improvement to the early information game. So I mentioned this before with the fog hack in the command center. So our plan was to actually do away with that system. We were adding some flying weak scouting units to each faction. These drones would have short air-to-air attacks and would let players build early, fast, reliable scouts. There would be some interplay in scouting and counter-scouting. Once the player put down anti-air, though, the scouts would effectively be shut out, giving everyone a controllable early window for gathering information. The two new generals for December were the APA Air Force General and the EU Hybrid Warfare General. We had a lot of other new units coming too. As I mentioned before, as we introduced new units, they weren't all necessarily tied to specific generals. A lot of them would be retroactively put into older generals' armies to more distinguish them, make them more unique from all the other generals, continuing to build on the value that each general was meant to have. So the new units, the APA rocket car, obviously would have gone to the rocket general and a few others. The APA heavy gun helo would have been an heir to an air unit that could shoot other air units and ground units using the Gatling mechanic, the Gatling spin mechanic, just bristling with Gatling guns. The APA Gatling infantry was coming in to basically shore up APA's anti-air ground units. They had a real lack of early anti-air units, and this was going to help them out across the board. The EU were getting the caster truck, which was this big thing with a pylon on the back, a pile on the back of it that would shoot like a chain lightning type thing and do some other support powers. And then they were getting an advanced recon vehicle, which was this configurable thing that you could either upgrade it with rockets or extra guns or that sort of thing. And finally, the Tournament Desert PvP map was a re-envisioning of the old Generals 1 map, a smaller, much more open PvP map, just to really give players an alternate way to play the game and a bit of a throwback to the older game. So January was a more typical content release with 2 generals and 4 units. This would have been a really cool release though, because one of the generals was the EU Airborne General. His airborne elite would parachute in, so we were finally getting units with parachutes. That would have been applied to the APA Firefly and its forward deployment ability. All of their infantry were meant to parachute in, but we had to get around to building the parachutes for all of them. The EU was also getting a mobile weapons platform, which was basically an airdroppable tank. The GLA Arms Dealer General, this guy was cool. He was getting the GLA Yak 38, which was it's a VTOL fixed-wing aircraft that they would have bought from some defunct Soviet states. And the GLA Black Suburban is sort of what you see Secret Service and you see in all the Tom Clancy movies. Basically, these guys roll up on you and open the doors and jump out and start shooting and then hop back in and drive away. And finally, February was our public release, and this patch was exciting because it would have also contained the long-anticipated fixed-wing aircraft. I love these things since they add such a visceral, high-tech feel to the combat. I loved them in Generals 1, and I was excited to get them into this game as well. So the 2 new generals we were bringing in were actually commandos in Generals 1, Black Lotus and Jarman Kell. Each faction was getting an airstrip to hold their fixed-wing aircraft. The EU and the APA were planned to have a fighter and a bomber unit. Those aircraft were in the game in the form of some player powers, but they were actually getting a full unit implementation. The tutorial was getting revamped to actually train people to play PvP and be a more dramatic and interesting experience. And here are some excerpts of our talking heads from some of the other generals that I wasn't able to go into detail about earlier. I'm just going to play these for you and let you enjoy the performances.
Toxins aren't so bad. No, they're very, very good for you. They're here to cleanse, not harm. Would I lie? Whew! That tank's too crazy to fail. Pray for forgiveness before it's too late. I won't judge.
You can pick the next bomb I use. Everyone thinks I'm quiet. But just wait till you hear my bombs. I've been on the run since I can remember, and I always survive.
Hope they weren't planning on building. I've got important things I could be doing. For instance, I've never gone skydiving. You? Oh, I love powers. We got any more? Finally, some real soldiers. I'm wanted in 22 countries, 4 counties, 3 cities, and 2 villages and counting. And you?
Oh, I'm getting tired of all this winning. Someone get me a half. That should make our job much easier. Our eyes and ears only get us so far. I know you better than you know yourself. I could help you.
But it just wasn't meant to be, I guess. So from here on are some PvP matches that I played recently that I'll narrate for anyone interested in the nitty-gritty of game units and mechanics that we did have in place as of the September release, which is what's currently live on the servers. As for everyone else, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this look into what Command & Conquer was meant to be, and hopefully we'll see it again someday.
I bet they're sneaky.
This game is a 1 versus 1 PvP between 2 APA generals. I'm playing the Espionage General and I'm fighting the Rocket General again. This map is Oasis, which is a 1v1 or 2v2 map, and in a 1v1 scenario it's a high economy macro focused type map. There are a large number of oil wells and expansions out here. So my opening is War Factory. I'd build that before the power plant just so I can start cranking out a scout truck as soon as possible. So this general, the Espionage General, he has a stealth tank, which I'm going to definitely pull out this game. His player power is misdirection, which allows you to spawn holographs of your targeted units. Keeping with the misdirection theme, I build a command center very early. My opponent has opened with a command center, so I don't really have any information on what he's doing, but my scout car should get there in plenty of time. So at this point I'm doing a fairly standard opening, filling out my supply center with the 5 harvesters that it takes. My opponent casts Spy Sortie on my base so he can see what I'm up to. It's a bit premature since he could already see that through the fog hack, but so it is. Alright, so my scout car is getting close to their base, and at this point I decided to do a little teching, so I upgrade my command center from level 1 to level 2. Since I have a war factory, a level 2 command center is going to open up the airfield and the advanced factory and tech lab for me. So my scout cars have a camera turret, deploy camera turret ability that I could use to throw that down. I scout their expansion first, so I want to see what he's up to, so I go ahead and use my scouting power, my spy sorties on his main base. It looks like he has some early tank hunters, and there's a construction unit that he used to go for some early oil. So it looks like he's trying to be pretty aggressive economically. There's 2 oil wells on this expansion area. My guess is that he was going to try and put both of them down right away. So because I saw he had infantry, I brought out a flame tank first, and since I'm not really too worried about what he's doing, I mean, heavy infantry will take a while to get to my side of the map. I go ahead and put down a supply center to do some early expanding. My scout cars are quite good against rifle soldiers, and they're not bad against those tank hunters. Tank hunters are specifically anti-heavy armor units, but these scout cars are light armor, so while they'll take a lot of damage, I think they can do as much damage. So my opponent doesn't think he can save his oil rig, so he sells it. That gives him back 2/3 of the money he put into it. So he may have broken even on that oil rig, so it was more loss of time than anything else. I'm sending my flame tank down there to try and clean up those infantry. If I can take those infantry out, then I'll definitely have an early advantage here.
Nothing like a power to scare them away.
So my opponent's still in that garrison. So flame tank en route. Looks like he brought in a rocket tank also, which was bad news. So between the tank hunters and the rocket tank, he wasted my flame tank. Rocket tank's very good against scout cars too, so I need to get him out of there. Takes one of these guys out. My other scout car is going to try to retreat. So I'm a little nervous at this point. What I thought was going to be a clear advantage turned into a clear disadvantage. Scout car is going up to make sure he doesn't try any really sneaky expanding over on the far right side of the map. So at this point I'm a little low on cash. I've got a Gatling tank and a flame tank. 2 flame tanks. So I'll be okay against infantry, but those rocket tanks, if he has a couple of them, I'm just scared. So it's time to tech up, throw down a tech lab. That's going to unlock the stealth tank. And I don't think he's gonna see that coming. I figure at this point I'm set up economically, so unless he attacks like right now, I'll probably be able to power up a nice army. My spy sword is ready, so I cast it again. He's got his factory. I didn't learn anything I didn't already know. My camera turret's still up there and sees his tank hunter. That makes me think he's probably going to try and take his expansion now. So we're both gearing up for a high economy game. Yeah, there's his 2 rocket tanks and tank hunters. So these flame tanks are not going to be doing so well. I try to augment them with some of these urban assault troopers. So the urban assault guys have a breach ability where they can automatically hop in a garrison and kill anyone inside. And they have basically shotguns, so they're good at suppressing, they're good at up close and personal battle. I decided to double down on my infantry, so I start up another barracks.
Enough units.
And there's my first stealth
go
tank.
distract the enemy.
So my stealth tank can get in there and do some good damage. I'm going to keep pumping out infantry at the base, just to try and fend off any sneak attack he might have. He hasn't been scouting at all. I don't know if he knows about my expansion. So I'm going to go ahead and try to set up a third. So send a construction unit over there. An APA upgrade called Population Control adds an extra infantry unit to every squad that I have. So I go ahead and invest in that since I have quite a few of these urban assault units. These 2 stealth tanks I'm going to send off on their own. They can do some hit and run. They have an ability called a particle accelerator, which is like a damage spike, which almost took out that scout car in one shot. The other scout car is gonna see my force. I don't know if my opponent was paying attention or not, but that's pretty much a giveaway that I'm being very aggressive here. I'm thinking that I'm gonna try to contain him. If I can just set up here in all these structures, I can garrison these assault troops, or these urban assault troops. The intrinsic ability that these urban assault troops have is a gun emplacement. So they have this sort of minigun that they have in their backpacks, and when they get in its structure, they set it up. And that is much more potent than their shotguns. The way garrisoning works in this game, you have to blow up the garrison structure to kill all the units inside. Some of the weapons have an anti-garrison damage type. These, whenever they hit a garrison structure, the damage spills through and attacks the units inside. So yeah, my opponent is going back to his oil rig taking, so I shut that down. He's positioning some troops up to try to defend what I think is an expansion up there. So when he does that, I'm going to try a little pincer attack. So my infantry distract him over there, and I drive in. I get my misdirection power ready. My stealth tanks are in there, but he has no detection, so he can't see them. So he does cast his spy sortie, but my stealth tanks are back behind where he cast it. He drops his sonic rocket power, which stuns my units, but I drop misdirection down, so that red flashy thing is actually a hologram tank, so he's going to be attacking some of the wrong units. I bring in my stealth tanks. I use their particle accelerator to blow up one of their rocket tanks. He's able to fend off that main force, but my stealth tanks are just fine. They're hanging out. They're going to deny him from getting up on that other tower. So back at my base, I've been cranking out some more units. Pretty much the same composition I've been going with. A lot of these urban assault troops with some stealth and flame tanks. So I'm going to take these 2 stealth tanks that I have and do a bit of harassing. He still can't see them. I believe that's a turret he's trying to put down there. But that's... which will actually give him vision. Oh, it's a propaganda tower. So he's actually going to buff his units with the propaganda effect, but it's not really going to do much good against these stealth units here. So I get a couple of shots off and just kite him back. Take out 2 of his tanks, and then I re-stealth. So the stealth mechanic in this game probably needs a little bit of explanation. The way stealth works is that units can't be seen until they're revealed, or unless they're scouted by a player power. You can reveal stealth units if they get too close to turrets or caster units. Wow, he's got 4 Overlord tanks up on that hill. But any stealth unit de-stealths when it fires, so it's not a complete hard counter to ground units if you don't have vision. But he's being really cagey. He's trying to get his overlords out, and I think he wants to try to roll over me. So in the meantime, I'm just going to keep doing some hit and runs with these stealth tanks, especially as this particle accelerator ability is working again. So I just use it to snipe a worker there. He's heavy infantry. I see a lot of rifle soldiers and a couple of tank hunters. He was a little too slow getting out of there, so one of my stealth tanks dies, but I did plenty of damage, and even managed to sneak a few saboteurs into his base. So saboteurs are stealth units where that have a sort of a short-range sticky bomb attack. So they'll drop their sticky grenades on structures and things. And oh man, I actually went really heavy on the saboteurs here. So I have 6 squads of saboteurs in his base, which is bad for him. So as you can see, they're just laying sticky bombs all over this rocket tank. So the other 2 I have in there are doing fine. They're just wrecking that supply center. His excuse me, his napalm mortars actually land some good hits on my saboteurs, but after I get a shot in or 2, they just stealth up and run away, and he can't do anything about it. This is where my economic advantage is starting to pay some dividends. So I cast a Horde Surveillance here that causes a plane to fly through and drop some stealth camera turrets. Back at my base, I also had built an airstrip, so I cranked out a bunch of Mantis helicopters. These saboteurs are still stealthed up in his base. He might have thought that they left, but they were just hanging out, and I think they're going to take out this war factory before they can get anyone to help out there. So I'm on 3 base at this point. I'm setting up some guys to get ready for a 4th base. Still generating stealth tanks and helicopters. Those Overlord tanks that my opponents have are just sitting there. He's not doing anything with them. And there are his scout cars. He put down some camera turrets, which allows him to see my saboteurs. So he kills all but one of the squads. So we're just going to run them off in the corner and see if they can escape. He's onto me though, so just let them do a little bit of damage. So I'm set up for another attack at the mouth of his base. So I cast Misdirection to make my army seem about twice as big as it actually is, and then I just head on in there. Those rocket tanks are the only anti-air that he has, so I send my Mantis copters in to focus fire them. My next target of opportunity has got to be that that propaganda tower, since it causes all nearby units to attack faster and to heal. So my Misdirection just ran out, but I took out all his anti-air. Those Overlords are tough, but unless he put a Gatling cannon upgrade on them, there's nothing he can do against these helos. So I go hard on the helicopters. I charge in some infantry, which I probably shouldn't have, but at this point, there's my level 4 player power just to take out what little income he has left. That was the carpet bombing. So my opponent is dead. I have 7,000 in the bank. He has no anti-air answer to these. He's probably trying to build some rocket tanks, but at this point I'm just going to churn out units, send them in, and clean up what's left of his base. So good game there, Rocket General guy, girl. This was a sort of a one-sided high economy game. He fled some of his workers over here, but my one remaining veteran stealth tank is just hanging out. My caster units come by. He tried to do a carpet bombing on his own base to take out my helicopters, but it doesn't hit air. So that's all she wrote in that game. Next up is an EU versus EU mirror match. I'm playing Cleaver, the experimental weapons general. My opponent is Daedalus, the Air Force general. So at this point the game's been going on for about 5 minutes. I took a fast expansion over to the bottom right. This is the red zone map again. Already did some harassment, sent some units to garrison the top center of the map, so they should be able to see when my opponent's moving out. I have not built a command center, and neither has my opponent, so we're both operating with full information right now. He's gone for an early oil well, as have I. But my expansion is actually revealed, so he knows what's going on there. I suspect he is going heavy helicopter since he is the Air Force General though, so I am fortifying that second base with some anti-air turrets, and I'm putting up my own airfield just so I can have some mobile anti-air or air-to-air when I need it. This game's really going to be about mobility more than anything. The Air Force General is really quite nimble. I have my tech lab up, so my war factory is spitting out Aegis tanks. The EU tanks are a little stronger than the tanks of the other factions. And I don't believe that the Air Force General has access to the Aegis tank. I think he can build the laser tank. Anyways, it's probably worth mentioning how the rockets and tanks are balanced in this game. So in the old CNC games, it was pretty much a rock, paper, scissors, where infantry with rockets would beat tanks hands down. Tanks would beat other vehicles, hands down. But when tanks shot infantry, they didn't really do much. So they would just like shoot at them for a long time and nothing would happen. So one of the directions we wanted to take this game was in a slightly more legitimate. So things would happen about how you would expect. Like if you see a tank popping shots off an infantry, you expect it to do a lot of damage. So the tanks and rockets in our game, they do a high amount of base damage, and then they do bonus damage against certain other vehicles. So rockets do bonus against heavy armor, like the main battle tanks and the large tanks. And then the tanks themselves actually do bonus against the light vehicles. So the sandstorms, the technicals, the scout cars, like tanks just go to town on those things. So back to the game, I have an APC with a few infantry up patrolling outside his base. I've got a couple helicopters on the way to harass. I really have a mixed force. I'm going for a little bit of everything here. My medium rocket vehicle is a great anti-air unit. He has a couple of his helicopters just guarding this oil, and it looks like he's taken another oil. I am not sure if he actually has that base in the top left. I haven't sent a scout lately or scan. But back at my base, so my command center's done, so he doesn't really know what I'm doing from this point forward without a scout or a scan. Basically gonna go heavy anti-air with these medium rocket vehicles. My own Air Force. It looks like he's moving out though. He knows that my expansion is in production down there, so he's moving out. I did garrison some structures out there though on the way, so his helicopters are stopping to take that out. I did de-garrison, but it was too late, so that building collapsed and killed everything under it. So I was actually wrong earlier. The Air Force General does have the normal Aegis tanks. I saw one rolling down with his Air Force. So he's certainly coming for my expansion. So I take the units in my main base and I start heading over there. Hopefully I can meet them just as they get there. He's so air heavy that those turrets I have will probably fend him off for a few seconds. It should be long enough for me to get into position. So there he is. That oil rig is certainly going to die. So I'm going to try dropping a Skylance. So a small damage and a stun. He drops a supply drop there. The supply drop is one of the arsenal only powers. So there I've got my assault APC using his channeled stun on the tank while my tank rolls in there. My anti-air javelins are just wasting his. So, but they do splash damage and I had them grouped up. Unfortunately, most of my anti-air just died though. And my turret doesn't seem to be shooting for some reason. I do have a back turret though. So I congregate my units around that. And if he flies any closer, then I think the turret ought to help.
Physics like that.
So there we go. I did a scan and he called in an air raid, which did a bit of damage, but that pretty much fended him off. I scanned because I thought he might have had some stealth aircraft, some of the Phantom helicopters there, but he didn't. And then I blew my last player power there, which is the Never Give In. It's a healing power, so those units repair very quickly after that. Back to my base, I have a good amount of money. Judging by the mini-map, my opponent is starting to expand over there. I wasn't thinking about the fog hack correctly earlier. Because he doesn't have a command center, I would have seen an expansion had he had one. So at this point, I should be pretty far ahead in terms of the money, though I have been spending quite a bit on tech. So at least I'll have a tech advantage. We pretty much, I think, had a wash economically on that last engagement. But I have a fairly large reinforcement army here. Again, going heavy on the longbows with a few tanks underneath it and some of the helicopters on top of that, the Orca helicopters. So I haven't built any laser tanks yet. The only reason I put down that advanced barracks was so I could build those MRVs, the medium rocket vehicle, or longbows as they're called in the game. But now I'm starting to build railgun units out of it. So the railgun squads are one of the EU's anti-garrison techniques. So I mentioned earlier how the garrisoning system works. So APA tends to have a lot of fire attacks that do anti-garrison damage. The GLA has a number of toxin attacks that also do anti-garrison damage for them. And for EU, it's their rail guns. So the rails sort of penetrate through the buildings and hit units directly. And my opponent has just gone for all Orcas here. Their splash damage is doing terrible things to my army. He just wrecks what longbows I have. I didn't focus my fire very well. And so, they're just pushing straight through. At this point, I try to pull what units I have back at my expansion. Time to throw down another rocket turret in case they decide to fly over there. The garrisoning the entire map like I did really paid off though, because it slowed down his advance. Like he has to stop along the way to destroy the structures that those units are in. Because he doesn't have anti-garrison damage, he has to take down the whole building to take out the units that I have inside there. So I am doing pretty well in the money. I have both my tech labs over on the expansion, so I really don't want to lose it. My tanks, I have to pull them back because they're in bad shape, but another rocket turret goes down for me. The tanks are spotting for the rocket turret at least, so I think this should be able to scare him away, or oh no, just take out his entire air force. So he played right into my hand there. Another Skylance destroys his tanks, but he calls in his fuel air bomb, which is his level 4 player power, and just wipes out most of my army. Supply Center's almost dead. He did take out one of my tech labs, but the other tech lab is still just fine. So, but at this point, I think I took out the majority of his air force. So what units I have in my main base, I select them and send them up to the top left. Back here, the survivors of this last fight, I put them into position. My never given power is just coming off cooldown. So I cast it. There it is.
Physics like that make me proud.
And then here we go up into the enemy base. My assault APC with units in it. I got one of the units ungarrisoned, which is a railgun squad. While my helicopter takes out the other two. He really should have focused on that copter, but he didn't know what was in my APC. He drops an air raid, but he drops it on my helicopter, so it didn't do anything. So I send my railgun troops over to basically watch for reinforcements. There, I see some coming in. I think it's another air force. My railguns don't have anything to do, so judging by the minimap, they just were taken out. And he's sending everything he has to come save his expansion. But I think my units were able to kill his supply center, which would just be huge for me if that's the case. Oh no, it's still alive. So I have to get out of there. Oh yeah, he is absolutely outnumbering me. This is me fleeing. I dropped my my own fuel air bomb, my own level 4 power there, just so I can control that space and get my guys to retreat safely. I knew that wasn't going to hit him, but I really didn't want to lose all of my attack force. So at this point, my money's a little low. I can't tell if my my first supply center is mined out. We're at the 16-minute mark, so it probably is going to be any moment. So I don't have many other choices for expansions on this map, but I feel like I need to take one or I'm not going to be doing so well. So I have a dozer up there getting ready to build as soon as I have the money. I have some railguns garrisoned up here, some of these shock troopers forward. I tell them to move towards that oil rig, just in the hopes that they'll be able to do something. So I've got my Valkyrie flyer and a laser tank here, along with a fire team, which is the little 2-man infantry caster unit up there. At this point, I'm a little curious why he hasn't built any stealth copters, but if he does, my not only can my caster units, the fire team, detect them, but the MRVs have an ability which is a radar pulse that is sort of like a temporary scan to reveal stealth units. But this is a nice looking army. I have a decent amount of anti-air and a good ground force. My shock troopers didn't do so well because they had a helicopter right there. So I just have them fall back into some local garrison structures. There's a scan on his oil. He's all out of oil. That's already been mined out, but he does have a few helicopters just hanging out there. So at this point, I'm just going to try and take out these straggler helicopters. He has 2 here and 2 at the other oil well. Again, I don't want to have my helicopters too close because these things do splash damage. So I spread them out a little bit and do basically get a 2-for-1 trade there. So back in my base, a couple more railgun soldiers. My main army is moving up in its position on the upper right side of the map. Finally, see, I have enough money to drop a supply center, so I opt for the one on the central left side of the map. It's in a very vulnerable position, but I'm hoping my opponent isn't going to scout there and I can build some anti-air. So if he sticks with his primary helicopter group, should be okay. But there's his air force. I have a feeling this is going to be the last big battle. He switched to mostly tanks actually, so he doesn't see the player power I drop, so there's a Skylance right on his head. It's a root and some damage, so they can't get close enough to all focus their fire, so I'm just able to wipe them out. So yeah, here goes. I'm just pushing up into his base at this point. I now have a level 3 Skylance. My general just leveled up to level 5. So all of the player powers are unlocked for him. It's probably worth mentioning how the general's player power works. So each general comes with a unique player power. So the player powers start at level 1 when the general is level 1. As the general levels up, the level 2 player power is a faction shared power. For EU, it's Never Give In. For the GLA, it's Sabotage. And for the APA, I don't remember what it is for APA, but we'll see soon. I'll have an APA game coming up. He nails my army with his level 3 air raid. That really hurt. Wow. And I didn't see it in time, so he wrecked me. But my level 3 Skylance should be enough to buy me some time to take out these tanks. So as I was saying, at level 2 I unlocked the Never Give In power. At level 3 my general's player power powers up. It goes from a 1-star power to a 2-star power. When my general hits level 4, they unlock the faction-wide, basically the giant damage power. For EU, it's the fuel air bomb. And then finally at level 5, the general specific power hits max level. So the reason we do it like this is because we wanted the generals to start with a power that was useful in early game skirmishes, but not a tide turner, not just be a Zot from the heavens that allowed you to win if you managed to land it correctly. So all things being equal, this was a good game. My opponent did very well with his Air Force, but I think my early expansion that he didn't take out was just allowed me to put the pressure on, go for some really diverse units and some high tech.
Not a great place to hide.
Here we go again. This time I'm playing EU again against an APA Rocket General. This game I decided to go heavy infantry. So the Rocket General is really great at making heavy ground units, tanks, rocket tanks, overlords, that sort of thing. So I'm going to show her how an infantry only strategy works. So we're back on Red Zone, which is a very garrison heavy map. Infantry do very well here because they can basically hole up in these high hit point buildings. Garrisoning adds a range bonus to their attack, and it gives them some extra vision as well.
Copy.
The EU rifle infantry are fairly strong. They're more expensive than other faction infantry in terms of their other faction rifle units anyway. So I've got 2 barracks here. They're in the low power state, which means they build slightly more slowly than they would otherwise. As I mentioned before, we were going to revise the EU power system again, make it so there was no low power build penalty, and that putting down power plants actually increase or decrease the build time and increase the efficiency of turrets, things like that. So I opt for some safe oil openings. My infantry I'm just cranking out and sending out on the map. I figure I can get some early map control. My opponent also went for an early oil. Neither of us have opened command center this game, so we're both operating with full map knowledge in terms of the buildings. So I noticed my opponent has a wharf factory and a barracks. So I just need to keep my eyes open, probably build a few rocket soldiers to go along with my rifles in case he ends up with some early tanks. So yes, just cranking out the rifle soldiers. So there's no real chance that I would win with just rifle soldiers, so I'm really just doing this because I know the map has so many garrison structures and I can control it. My opponent doesn't seem to be putting any effort into map control. He is trying to throw down a fast expansion though, and again, because of the fog hack, I'm able to see this and get a few units in there to do something. The dozers, or the construction units, they're not vulnerable to rifle fire, but they don't have an attack, and they're pretty much sitting ducks while they're building the structure. So if I can take that thing out before his structure is done, it'll cancel the structure. And I think that is what just happened.
Ready, sir.
I have a number of units on the map now, going for pretty much full map control. This is an interesting situation for me to have. So I'll have almost all information of what's going out on the map, but if my opponent has been building up a large, heavy mechanized force, he could potentially just roll past all these garrison structures and come wipe out my base. So I'm hoping he's not going to do that. He sent out another rifle squad himself, the Red Guard. But without upgrades, the Red Guard are relatively weak. They're cheap, but they can't really do much. So my rifle squads are just, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. But he does sneak past and grab that garrison structure. And there are a couple of his own scout cars. So what I do here is use the entrench ability that these units have, which allow them to basically dig in, gives them an armor bonus and a range bonus, and then I cast the cyber command on them, which gives them a little extra firing rate. So my infantry actually win that engagement. That is very good for me because I took out 2 of his scout cars, so I certainly came out ahead there. I've gone ahead and taken out another. I've captured another oil well myself up on the bottom left there, outside my left side ramp, and my infantry have just been harassing his own oil. Looks like he's sending some units out, some more scout cars. I already used my cyber command power, so these infantry are not going to last long against the scout cars. But again, I'm just basically spamming rifles at this point. I have a large group that I'm sending up to his base, and I now have my advanced barracks out. So I'm transitioning away from these normal units. Now, actually, it looks like I have 2 railgun squads in with this one. So the railgun squads do line damage. They have a long range. They do the anti-garrison damage. And they actually do bonus damage against heavy armor, so they're good against tanks. Exactly how good this strategy is, in this build, it's fun to do and it's fairly effective. You can actually pull off an infantry-only build with some generals, because particularly EU, because they have such a wide variety of infantry. With the crushing change that was coming in with the October patch, this strategy was would basically be invalidated.
Move out!
The first pass of crushing was one which had heavy vehicles like tanks basically insta-kill squads when they would run over them. We were looking at some other ways to improve it, ways to allow lighter vehicles to interact in a similar way, and ways to make it not such an automatic win, like partial damage based on how you ran over the squads. Lighter vehicles could do like a knockback stun combo. But anyway, back to this game. So my opponent's pretty well hemmed into his base. He did put up a command center, and so did I, so we're both cloaked in secrecy again.
What about
The oil rig that he built didn't last, so at this point I have an economic advantage. I'm trying to get even farther ahead though by building my own supply center. So far it's still all rifle railguns. My tech lab 1 just finished though, and now I can build the fire teams. So the fire teams are the EU caster units. So there you see some of the APA rocket soldiers. I'm sorry, some of the APA rifle soldiers were holed up in that building, but my railguns were able to take them out without blowing up the building with their anti-garrison damage. So the fire team unit that I was talking about, I'll have soon. There's a scan, tanks and light vehicles. My opponent's not looking good at all here, so I'm just gonna have some fun with him. The fire team that I have building right now, the real reason to have them in a match like this is for their Predator missile ability. Predator missile is a single target rocket from the skies that does a lot of bonus damage against heavy armor such as tanks. Also does some splash damage. Looks like my opponent did garrison a few structures, so he is trying to push out. He has a fairly decent army there, so I'm maneuvering my infantry up there to try and flank them. The infantry are very slow in this build. We wanted to sort of differentiate their role from the vehicles. He has a few Mantis copters as well, which is kind of scary because I don't have any anti-air right now. So I start making some rocket soldiers. The EU rocket soldiers can shoot up into the air with their tow missiles. And oh wow, he has some mortar squads garrisoned in that small building there. So the napalm mortar squads have extremely long range. They're sort of like they're basically infantry artillery units. So I make it a priority to wipe them out with my railguns. I don't have anything to do against these helicopters though, so I just start garrisoning like crazy. A few units here, a few units there, but my opponent actually got the better of this exchange. He's hopefully going to be delayed getting through all of those structures that I have garrisoned though. There was an upgrade for my rocket soldiers that I bought which allows them to have increased range against air targets. Should come in handy against those Mantis helicopters. It looks like he's cranking out those tanks. So the APA tanks are, they're interesting because APA can get them right away with their war factory. They don't require a tech lab or anything else. So APA can be very good at tank rushes. The tanks are fairly expensive, but they're not as effective as the tanks of the EU faction. But at this point, I have 3 fire teams here, so I'm going to have some fun with the Predator missile. The other 2 abilities that the fire team has is a there's a blind that they do, which is communications jamming, which basically reduces the vision of the units that it hits. And the other one is fire support. What fire support does is it makes, basically they laze the targets and, well, real quick, here's some Predator missiles, fire from the sky. Makes very short work of those tanks and is a lot of fun to do, by the way. Bam. So yeah, the fire support ability, you cast it on enemy units and basically the fire teams laze the targets, which cause them to take increased damage against any incoming fire. So my infantry completely destroyed my opponent's army. At this point, my second base is up and running. I have a number of oil fields captured, so I'm feeling pretty good about this. There's the Never Given power to heal my veteran infantry, and I still have map control. I'm moving some units around up in here just to make sure that my opponent isn't trying to do a sneaky expansion or flank my forces. At this point, I have pretty much all the infantry that EU can muster other than the commando. At my expansion, I'm putting in a war factory and an airfield. And bringing a few rocket soldiers over for reinforcements in case he tries to fly some helicopters back behind me. And otherwise, just mustering my army a bit closer to his base, getting ready for what I imagine will be the final assault. Because this is a sort of low economy map, it tends to be a lot about the handling the engagements and about controlling these garrison structures. My general just hit level 3 and we're about 12 minutes in, so it's a bit of a slower game than normally happens. There is a UAV spy drone in the enemy base. He has 3 Mantis helicopters, 2 tanks, and a scout car. I don't think that's really going to help him against what I have. He's again getting caught up with some garrison structures, so as he's attacking it, I pull out my railgun squad. And I thought he was ignoring them, but he decides to kill them. But at this point I have a pretty big infantry army on either side of him, so it's time for a little pincer maneuver here. Actually no, it looks like I had changed my mind. I send them up to put pressure on the main base to try and pull them back, and my other force is going to pinch them in between garrison structures. So there's a couple of Predator missiles in there. There's the starfish animation glitch on the fire teams. I haven't seen that in a while. That was something that the October patch fixed, so internally that's been gone for a long time. That mortar squad is still in that structure though. Those guys are veterans. But at this point, I'm in his base with fire teams, railguns. There's not really anything he's going to do. Here are my stealth copters, the Phantoms. Phantoms have an ability called Go Loud, which basically turns off their stealth in favor of a speed increase and an attack speed increase. My infantry force, I just moved up into the enemy base. They seem to be doing all right. I don't think my opponent has gained enough experience to unlock his level 4 huge damage power, so they should be safe on their own. So he has a few units coming out of the top left. I think he wanted to see if I had built a base over there, which I was starting to, but luckily the units I have are more than a match. Yeah, the Mantis cannot fight back against air units, so my Phantom Copters with their Go Loud ability just wipe the floor out. Back in the enemy base, I still have a few infantry holding out up here. My fire teams are all alone though. They're just sitting there, so they're calling down a few Predator missiles just to stay alive. They're flying around over there. Gotta love Alpha software. So a few other infantry that I have, I'm checking out to make sure he hasn't expanded. And at this point, it's just about getting some units together for the coup de grace. I don't think he can even fight back against these stealth copters, so I just fly them in. And the stealth copters, unlike the normal copters, they don't do splash damage. They do their anti-heavy armor, so they're more for sniping tanks than anything else. There's my level 4 player power, and before I get to use it, my opponent surrenders. So, good game, sir.
Of blood now.
Next up is a GLA versus EU game. So here I'm using the GLA Marauder General.
It will be up soon.
So this guy is sort of a hardened anything goes, scrappy terrorist type fighter. I open up with a war factory. I'm fighting against the Air Force General on Oasis. I noticed that a lot of people seem to pick the Air Force General because his early air rushes are so strong. The balance patch before this really fixed that, so they're not quite as good. I suspect these players haven't figured that out yet.
Someone else can build.
So I open up with some technicals, which are the really fast scout. My opponent does command center first, so I'm hoping I can get a few technicals in there to harass him and make him pay. It's worth noting that my technicals cannot do any economic harassment here because the EU harvesters are flying units and the technicals can only shoot ground.
What is it?
So my technical is going off-road back there through the jungle on his way up there. I'm trying something a little cheeky here too, which is a fast expand to my natural expansion down here. Because I don't have a command center, this is all apparent to my opponent if he's paying attention. So at this point, I feel like it's safe because my opponent goes command center first. He's dropped 1,000 supply into that structure, and my expansion, the GLA expansion, costs about 1,600, I think. So in order for him to actually respond in time, he's going to have to put down his own war factory, which he did. He has a barracks and a war factory. So he might be able to harass me, but I'm hoping that I can do some damage here to put him on his heels. His rocket soldiers do some damage against my technical, but not that much, not compared to the damage the technical does to them. The technical does bonus versus infantry. This map has a large area behind the main base, which to a lot of players' chagrin, they've noticed that it's very easy for GLA to put sneak attack tunnels back there. So technical is cut off, so just sacrifice him. We were actually fixing this map, so it didn't have that big side area to the base, by the way. But I do have 2 expansions up at this point. Let's see, I have a technical up at his base. Looks like he's engaged. He's just standing up around there. His infantry are garrisoning the 2 garrison structures at the side. I was a little too slow. He did go rocket soldiers, so he's investing quite a bit of money in infantry at this point. I feel confident that some technicals would be able to fend off any aggression that he has. It takes a long time for infantry to walk across the map without transports. It is possible he is building some APCs to bring them down here, and if he does, I'll be in a bad spot. But next to my expansion, I put down a barracks, and in my main base there's a toxin lab. So I intend to go toxin tech with the Marauder General here. I upgrade the war factory down the toxin path. The toxin and salvage tech directions are exclusive. Oh, this is interesting. So my opponent took not 1 but 2 of these oil wells. This is an interesting economic alternative. He's even building a turret on one of the entrances to this corner area here. This is an interesting tactic. I think my opponent knows what he's doing. We were actually looking to increase the viability of oil wells in the October patch. So right now in this build, the oil wells produce 5 gold a second. As of the October patch, they were boosted up to 8 gold a second, so they were going to become even more valuable. So my toxin tank unlocked toxin copters, the radar van, and the toxin launcher. The toxin launcher was one of our crazy imbalanced units for a long time as well. By this build, I don't think they are quite as crazy as they were before. I don't know if everyone's figured that out yet. I had played some games where people did try to rush straight to toxin launchers, and it does fairly well against certain matchups still. But there are a lot of ways to counter it, and the generals that don't have a way to counter it, as we added more units to the game, those units would get rolled back into these other generals to shore up weaknesses like that. so that each general would actually be able to hold their own in the 1v1 games. So at this point, I have a clear. I'm doing very well economically. His oil wells are generating about 10 gold a second, but a fully saturated supply center is going to generate 30 a second. And I can also put down oil wells here, which is what I do. My command center's up, so he isn't actually going to see those oil wells pop up on his map, though probably no. And that's also a salvage lab that I put down to go down the other tech direction. Being a little cheeky here, going for even more oil wells. And go for the third expansion. So if I'm able to pull this off, then I'll be so far ahead, my opponent's not really going to be able to do anything. Toxin Chopper, I decide it's time to go out, do some scouting, and do some economic harassment. It's also very easy to sneak an expansion on this map, so I go out to try and scout all of the potential supply centers so I don't get cocky. There's a bunch of terrorists I'm creating, just in case some of those heavy EU tanks roll in. Doesn't look like there's any expansion out here, so fly my Toxin Chopper up. No expansion down here either. I don't believe that turret can shoot air units, so I just fly around the back here to do some more scouting down the shoreline. On the right side, the technical doesn't find any expansions either, so it looks like he is trying to build a supply center in that corner, though. Actually, it looks like he did, and it's already fully saturated. Doesn't have any anti-air back there, though, so my Toxin Choppers are able to do very well. Time to start cranking out some of those artillery units as well. Got a Marauder tank there guarding the top of my ramp, and I send a few other Toxin Choppers to go and harass his main base. Third base is done, so I can go ahead and start building that up. Something took out my helicopter, my Toxin Chopper, but there's a GPS scrambler in his main base just to see what he has. That circle around the command center is a player power baffling radius. When you build a command center, nothing around it, it basically prevents the other player from casting any of his non-scouting player powers around your command center. The idea there is to prevent people from just dropping bombs on your worker units. So you have a way of preventing player powers from dominating the game with a little bit of forethought and investment. There's nothing to prevent you from building several command centers, and in fact, I've seen some very good strategies that involve blanketing areas with command centers just to prevent the other person from using player powers. Until later in the game, all the factions can research a player power penetration or a baffle penetration that lets them basically be able to break their way up any ramp to fight back against the Ultra Turtles. So yeah, there's two of my Toxin Choppers in his base. I drop my mass RPG player power. So that just lobs all of these RPGs into the opponent's base. Didn't seem like it hit very much there. There's a bit of a random factor, but I drop a sabotage on that airfield, and my opponent, it looks like he ran in and attacked. My terrorist did some damage against his force. Actually, my terrorist took out his entire force there, so he's got to be feeling pretty bad at this point. I damaged most of his economy. I took out his power plant, so he's producing slower. There goes his airfield. And now I'll try to do even more economic damage while I continue to do very well economically. Actually, I have an incredible amount of money in the bank, so I researched Shadow Cloak, a very expensive upgrade, start building some anti-air, upgrade all of these barracks, and start bringing out these elite toxin squads. There's my GPS Scrambler, which is a spy / blind. He has some LRVs, some of those light recon vehicles, so those are garrisonable. So I believe he has some rocket soldiers in there, but this is a fairly heavy little group here, especially as these toxin squads come out. The toxin squads are beefy and completely destroy most infantry units that they run against. They do anti-garrison damage, so not worried about that those LRVs if they get near my toxin squads.
It will be up soon.
So getting a little greedy here, trying to grab a 4th expansion when my opponent's not looking, hoping to just completely roll over him. I almost built a super weapon there, but decided against it. I don't tend to use super weapons much in these games, but they're a spectacular way to, I guess, rub your opponent's face in the dirt. Very Command and Conquer style structures. And then there's another expansion. I actually put down a 5th and a 6th, it looks like. Spending all the money I had on further economic expansion. Continuing to build these elite units. Alright, research Rallying Cry. So Rallying Cry is for most of the basic infantry, allows them to gain a small health boost along with some speed and attack rate boost. My main force has some radar vans with them as well. Radar vans with that crucial smoke screen ability and the Skynet plus the mine layering. The extremely versatile unit also detects stealth. So my Shadow Cloak is done, so I notice all my Toxin squads have stealth now. So I position them up, or I send them up to hang out by my opponent's main base entrance area there. Otherwise, just cranking out the units. I built some air defense in front of one of my expansions, start saturating these other bases. I'm doing pretty well on tech. I think almost everything's upgraded. Just trying to keep my spending up and start getting into place to try and seal the deal here. So my opponent went heavy LRVs, and each of those are garrison. So there's a GPS scrambler. I use that to temporarily blind them while I go in and snipe some of the LRVs and some of the units they have inside. There's a toxin bomb. That was a player power that I borrowed from the Toxin General. So it basically causes the sneak attack tunnel to appear, and this little remote control buggy with a toxin bomb comes out. You can actually grab it and control it and drive it into some enemy units if there are none nearby. I didn't quite think this attack through. Those machine gun turrets are very good against infantry, including the toxin squads. So they were sort of fended off, but these LRVs are not going to do so well against these Marauder tanks. He does have some rocket squads garrisoned over there. There's his never give in power. He just used it to heal up his LRVs. So here come my toxin launchers, trying to clear out the garrisons. No problem. There's my radar van. I want to cast Skynet over here to slow and damage all of these units, and he's just sitting there taking it. I'm not sure why. Maybe he's busy looking at something else. Back at the base, I've got a bunch of rocket buggies. My money is insane. I've totally ignored all the income that I have, so just taking a moment here to queue up a ton of units to try and spend a little more, put down a couple more barracks, and just try to overwhelm him with terrorists or something like that.
I suppose we can build.
Yeah, a couple more barracks over here.
I suppose we can build later. Building as fast as we can.
Oh, it looks like he has a lot of helicopters. They seem to be stacked up there too. They are very vulnerable to that Skynet ability though, and they're all within range. So Skynet is a great anti-air unit, anti-air ability. It takes, I believe it takes two or three shots to actually take out helicopters. But there's all of my rocket buggies, and those rocket buggies are just going to wreck the helicopters. They were all at low health because of Skynet. At this point, I have so much money, and because I'm GLA, I'm kind of callous about my units, so I just send them in to fight those machine gun turrets. Because they're anti-garrison damage, I send them in to take that out and go do some oil damage, hoping to, have a lot of terrorists here to just go in and roll over the enemy. My opponent played very well. He did a lot of interesting tactics, but he did forget to scout, and he didn't put any pressure on my bases. So economically, he just fell way too far behind. Marauder is at level 4 already. I'm taking what I have to keep the pressure on, take out this, what's left of his expansion over here. It doesn't look like he was able to resaturate that. Send my stealth toxin unit up here, research the player power baffling penetration. So if it comes down to it, I can cast my nuclear liberation on the ramp. My terrorists are just antlining in here, taking out all of his, just blowing up all of his light recon vehicles. I don't really like spending them on that, but sure, why not? I've got 16,000 in the bank, so I'll be doing okay. And that was it. My opponent couldn't take anymore.
This place is quiet. Let's make
Here we go on our newest map, the 3v3 map called Monsoon. This is a high economy map with very few garrison structures. It's a large map and quite wide open. I'm playing the APA Urban Combat General called the Beast. On my team, there's someone else playing another APA Beast, and the EU Air Force General. On the other team, there's an EU Air Force General, there is a GLA Marauder, and there is an APA Thousand Suns Atomic General. So they have a very nice combination on their side. I'm a little worried about our side though, because the Urban Assault General does very well when there are a lot of garrison structures, and there are very few on this map. There are a couple little thatched roof shanties around, so I begin by creating some of these Urban Assault troops and just sending them out, trying to get a little bit of map control. Put down a power plant so I can produce more quickly, and there goes the command center. One of the other benefits of the command center that I didn't mention earlier is the command bonus that it gives you. Command bonus is a production rate increase, so when you have a command center, all of your units build 20% faster. So yeah, many uses in the command center that once you have played the game a few times, it becomes very useful, and your timing for building it is crucial. The APA tech tree actually relies on upgrading the command center, so it's even more in their benefit to build a command center early. On the opposite side, one of my opponents has built a command center, and both of my teammates have. So the enemies are going to be in the dark with us. I can already see that they're starting to take oil rigs around the map. There are a lot of oil rigs, oil wells on this map, and a few of them are starting to put a rush together to come into the front of my base. My urban assault squads are pretty good, but they have some specifically anti-infantry light recon vehicles there, and I think. Yeah, this is tough. My opponents really need to come help me out. I built some flamethrowers which do pretty well. Just roast them. And the harvesters, the drivers of the harvesters have little pistols too, so they're not totally helpless. Over here I was harassing some oil wells, but my opponents sent all of their infantry over to fend them off. They really want that oil well. But my one urban assault guy gets away. His 3 teammates died, but he survived, so I'm gonna run him around, try to garrison that structure so he survives. In addition to some of these flamethrower squads that I have, I start going for some early saboteur for some crazy harassment. Saboteur are those stealthy, short-range, sticky grenade throwing units. If none of my opponents have detectors, then I can get them in the back of some bases and do some damage, or I can take out some of these oil rigs pretty quickly. So far I'm going down an infantry heavy path. Looks like I got that urban assault guy into a garrison structure, and my opponent's just sitting there letting his units get blown up. So again, when you get the urban assault guys into a garrison structure, they pull out their little miniguns and go to town. So they'll have to work hard to get that guy out of there. It doesn't look like he can reach the oil well from there though. Since I'm going so heavy on the infantry, I grabbed the population control upgrade. So now my saboteurs have 4 members in it. My flame squads have 5 each. Looks like there was oh, he has a GLA worker over there. The GLA worker can throw Molotovs, so he's not totally helpless. Before my saboteurs die, I do put a sticky bomb on that worker, which I think blew up after I moved the camera. My flame soldiers do very well against structures, particularly oil wells. So 2 squads of them running around the map taking out oil should be good. At this point, I think it's time for an expansion. Being on one base is a little restricting on this map, especially since my base was in the middle, and any attacks will certainly be coming my way. So over here, I pop the urban assault guys out and have them take out, harass some oil wells. There's another oil well down from my flame squads. So it's time for me to put down a few more defenses. I don't really have any anti-air. None of this general's infantry, actually none of the APA infantry at the time of this could actually shoot air units. I drop some tear gas down here. It buffs my guys and it debuffs his guys. His light recon vehicles are so much faster than mine though, so he kites around and eventually takes out my flame guys. So I'm trying to figure out what to do now. My second expansion is, or my second base is pretty well up. Doing some good harassment over here. Looks like my teammates are scouting another forward expansion. I'm still all infantry at this point, which is starting to get a little scary. I need my income to become boosted a bit so I can transition either to Air Force or to tanks. Here's an attack on my opponents and mine. Good thing I built those anti-air units, or that anti-air tower. The Urban Assault General has this Gatling turret which can shoot up and down. My teammate has, it looks like he built an artillery unit and some Gatling, and some Gatling tanks. So the Gatling tanks don't do much damage against those things, but that artillery unit sure does. So he scared off those light recon vehicles, no problem. Feeling pretty good about this expansion, so I drop an airfield down. It's time to do something a little bit different, maybe get a little more mobility because this map is so big. There's an opponent doing a spy sortie. I have a much larger army out on the map doing some more harassment. Unfortunately, the Marauder General's player power goes off, but my duck and weave get through there no problem. Some more harassment is pushed away from the main base. And I'm right back to cranking out infantry. My primary composition here is the Urban Assault Squad along with the Flame Squad. So Urban Assault with their riot shield upgrade are pretty tough as far as infantry go. So they can be the meat shield while the flamethrowers with their AoE damage can do well here. My Urban Assault guy here still hanging out, still harassing some oil wells. So he was well worth the money I paid for him. At this point, we're about 8 minutes into the game. These oil wells are starting to pay for themselves and profit quite a bit. I just noticed a scout power on one of my opponent's forward expansions. So our opponents are being very greedy. They're definitely going for it. My partner to the top is really turtled in. He likes those artillery units. I use my horde surveillance power. So the bomber flies in and drops off some camera turrets, which gives me vision on that expansion area. Looks like they're all massing together up there, all 3 of my opponents. They're not going to let go of that very easily, and I certainly am not going to be able to go penetrate that defense by myself. I'm not getting a whole lot of coordination with my teammates either, so I'm a little worried at this point. If they've taken that forward expansion, they've been very aggressive with the oil wells. I'm guessing we're at an economic disadvantage. And I'm a little behind on my spending here. I just noticed I'm up to 5,000, which is no good. So I didn't want to go very heavy on the Mantis, though. I wanted to switch over to one of the higher tier units, like the Helix. So to do that, I have to put down the tech lab.
Show him what we do.
As a player, I'm very bad at the hotkeys with the 3 different factions. Mostly we use the contextual QWERTY setup, but for the builder unit command card, since they can attack move, we had to do an alternate arrangement for them. So here I have a Firefly. This is the APA caster unit that I have moving around behind the enemy base. One of the APA caster unit's ability is called forward deployment. So he turns on his forward deployment mode, and then he can pretty much buy infantry from any of your open barracks. I researched the efficient deployment upgrade. So efficient deployment, or so the forward deployment power doesn't cost as much heat. We didn't get the parachute animations in as of this build, but I did drop 2 saboteurs in the back of his base to harass this other expansion. I mentioned the heat system when I talked about the caster, and that's because the way the caster abilities work, when you use them, it adds heat. It's sort of like an inverse mana. But here at the front of my base, wow, they've got overlords and main battle tanks. I dropped some tear gas on them to try and debuff them, but there's no way I'm going to be able to take this army out by myself. I hope my opponents are paying attention. I go heavy on the Mantis aircraft because I don't think he has any anti-air. So this could be my only saving grace. Those 3 overlords are just driving by, wrecking everything. My 2 saboteurs that I dropped in are still alive, so I'm gonna do a little more economic harassment. My teammates are helping out. I can see on the mini-map that they are fighting off those overlords, so my base is gonna be saved for now. Yeah, there's not much that Overlord can do by himself against those air units. He does have the ability to upgrade a Gatling turret on top of his Overlord, but he didn't do that. It's possible he had one of the bunker upgrade or the propaganda tower upgrade. I wasn't paying attention and lost a helicopter there. One of the other opponents seems to be attacking now.
Will be the end of that.
I have a lot of the upgrades for my infantry, and here's a Helix. So the Helix is sort of like a flying overlord. It has the same 3 upgrades. It can get a propaganda tower, a Gatling turret, or a bunker. Again, though, these guys went heavy overlord, or I guess it's the same guy. I guess that's the Thousand Suns just cranking out the overlords. But he doesn't have any anti-air to back him up, so my teammates are able to push him back. I upgraded the Helix there with the propaganda turret, propaganda tower, which basically gives him that propaganda effect to all the units around him, where they have the increased attack rate and the healing over time. He tries to cast a oh, he does hit me with a carpet bomb. He takes out all my infantry. That hurts. So I'm starting over here again, but I have a good amount of money in the bank, about 3,000. Start deploying some extra flame squads, another tank. I'm getting a little low on cash on my expansion though, and I notice it's not even saturated. My main is almost out, it only has 3,500 gold left. Queue up a Firefly. I still have a flame squad out there from all the harassment, so I sent it down in the hopes of just doing a little bit of damage, maybe some distraction. This Helix, with its propaganda tower upgrade, I garrison a bunch of flame squads, and I intend to fly it over and do some back up the base, destruction. Hopefully I can just drop them in the back of the enemy base and have them wipe out a key structure or two. I drop a Horde Surveillance onto their expansion. They have a turret, so they're able to wipe out a couple of them, but I have a few left, so I can see that that's where the bulk of their army is massing. I'm getting a little nervous at this point because I'm only on 2 base, and one of those bases is almost out of money. They've already taken their forward expansion, and here they are in front of our base again. My teammate is sending out a pretty nice force, but it gets wiped out. Not much I can do but start casting some player powers of my own. I drop some tear gas in front of them to debuff them, and then I call in my carpet bombing, and I nailed him. Killed all of the infantry in that attacking force, but he wasn't alone. There's a big army behind him, so I'm a little nervous. My Helix with the 4 flame squads in it is already in the enemy base though, so maybe I can catch them unaware. Their Marauder General is casting their RPG strike. That's probably going to do more damage to my structures than my units though. I have another Helix ready. Helix not so great at the direct damage. I'm upgrading it with a bunker so I can put some units inside, some infantry inside, and the infantry can shoot out. The little reinforcement group I had over here, I'm pulling it back to the base and hope that it can save my bacon. They're attacking my teammate on the bottom. Hopefully he can hold out until I get there. They have another Overlord and 2 rocket tanks there. I would be in trouble, but he's pulling his Overlord out. I can take out the Overlord. My teammate calls in an air raid, and he has a couple of Phantoms there, so I think he's going to be okay. I've actually built up a nice little strike force, and my north teammate has a couple of artillery units there. So yeah, that attack was definitely a failure. My Flame Squad attack group didn't do so well, judging by the mini-map. And then more rocket tanks here. They are gonna do some damage. They're definitely gonna take out my 4 Flame Squads, but at least I can get some hits in. I maneuver one of them around so his AoE hits both of those tanks, and there's another Overlord. So they only have 1 APA General on their team, the Thousand Suns, but he must be on 3 base, and he seems to be putting it all into these Overlords and rocket tanks. Yeah, this guy's good, but my EU teammate saves his supply center with those Valkyrie air bombers. The Valkyrie bombers are sort of like flying artillery. They do a large AoE, but they don't do a whole lot of they don't really do a whole lot of damage until you get a ton of them flying around. My main base is mined out. I'm sitting on almost 4,000 bucks though, but I'm really preoccupied in combat. I don't want to lose my Fireflies and my Helix here. My Helix with the bunker. I think it's hard to tell. My guys should be shooting out of the Helix. Oh, and I lose them. Oh, that hurts a lot. Fireflies, I put into forward deployment mode, and I get a couple of Saboteurs. Maybe the Saboteurs can do some damage to that Overlord. I think my tank that's over there is just gonna die against, yeah, that magic combination again. 2 rocket tanks and an Overlord. Maybe while they're distracted, my Saboteur can do something. I have them pop a shot on the Overlord. It does bonus damage, gets heavy. The sticky grenades go off though, and that Overlord is doing just fine. Those things are just gargantuan. So hard to take out. My teammate has a couple of Mantis helicopters as well. I have 3 Fireflies. I'm not sure what I can do with them. Forward deployment is not that effective with 2 barracks. So what I really need to do is upgrade the Flux Cluster Bomb so I can use an offensive power on that caster unit. Out in the middle of the field, I've got a Saboteur harassing one of the oil rigs, and he's going to take that out. And then the Thousand Suns player has some rocket tanks out there harassing my teammates' oil as well. So this game is really back and forth. Still, I have a decent amount of money, but I need to be careful because I'm sure that expansion is about to run out soon. I queue up another Helix, very expensive unit, but like I said before, they're basically flying Overlords. So I can't really think of much else that I can do to contribute to this fight. I have a few Gatling tanks here in front of some urban assault squads. I really want to take that expansion base. There's an overlord. I bring in my Firefly and use the Flux Cluster Bomb. Flux Cluster Bomb does a root and damage, but not much damage against a high health target like the Overlord. And those Gatling tanks don't really do anything. So the most I can really do here is lock it down with my caster units. Some more Flux Cluster usage. I can keep him away from my buildings while the turret that he's in range of can hit. And he actually drives in range of that artillery that's huge, so I just keep rooting him and the artillery is just gonna wipe him out. I don't know that I've ever seen a Gatling tank get the last shot in on an Overlord, so that was pretty epic. Again, floating at around 3,000, but I'm quite nervous here with being only on one base and that base about to run out. We're 20 minutes into this game. Command & Conquer is a very fast game, so 20 minutes is a long time. We tend to average slightly under 15 minutes for 1v1 games. Typically, the larger multiplayer games will go very fast as well, because RTS games tend to have such a snowball mechanic in the larger team games. My teammate to the south dropped. All of his structures are gone. I didn't see when that happened, but yeah, this is bad. So now it's 3 versus 2. 2 APA beasts against the combined forces right on the other side of the map.
Is always in style.
So this is going to be tough to pull out, but as in any good RTS, it's always possible to make a comeback. So another Horde surveillance that I put down. Their flame turret is going to take out the ones super close to the supply center. I load up this Helix with a couple of saboteurs, and the other with a couple of flame squads.
Let's send a message.
So I'll try a little bit more drop harassment. My opponent is keeping me from taking my teammate's abandoned expansion, though. He drove up some rocket tanks and prevented my supply center. So my economic situation is getting kind of drastic here. I've mined out my expansion. So this is it. If I can't fend him off with what I have, like, that's going to be game over for me. But he drives his units directly into my base, and my teammate's Mantises are able to do well. It looks like my teammate is getting attacked on the far left central of the map as well. With Flux Cluster Bomb and what I have, I can take out that Overlord no problem. My top priority now has to be securing another expansion. My teammate did pretty well in that engagement from what I could tell. He still has a good portion of the top of the map and the far left. And he certainly is dug in back at his expansion. We're definitely fighting in the back of our bases now. I don't feel too confident about that. And that forward base of our opponent is doing quite well. Here is that enemy force. He's decided to come into our front door again, right through the artillery of my buddy. I drop in a carpet bomb. It takes out, it looks like all the units in the back, but not the 3 overlords. And again, those overlord tanks are going to be so hard to kill. This Thousand Suns opponent of ours is something else. So I sell that supply center. I need to raise enough money to build another supply center. There's the drop force that I have. Dropping some infantry and just doing what damage I can to their forward base. If I'm right, this is one of the only sources of income that they have left, and this is the reason why my opponent can fund those overlords. At the same time, I fly 2 Fireflies back into their base. I don't see any units, so they're forward deployment mode. I drop a few saboteurs, and these saboteurs I'm hoping could take out that advanced factory, possibly command center. Those 2 rocket tanks could put a damper on my plans, though, so there's a Flux Cluster Bomb to root them and get the Fireflies out and run away with the saboteurs, and the 1 saboteur is left with only 1 health, but he escapes. And doing some pretty good damage here. If I can keep their force from coming in, yes, it took out the supply center. More Flux Cluster in there, rooting those rocket tanks, and my army is pushing through. Long distance mining with my miners too. That's how drastic my economic situation is at this point. I really need to think about taking a base. My Helix get taken out. Those rocket tanks are so effective against air. They're not quite as good against tanks. I run my Gatling tank up front to take some damage, to absorb the hits, and my other tanks, I just want to do what they can before they die. I think we'll be able to take out one of those rocket tanks, but possibly not both. But my saboteurs are still alive in the back of the base. We'll see what they can do about this command center. They didn't take out that advanced factory, but they came close. Back at my main base, my workers are still doing the long distance mining. I don't need this power center, or this power plant, so I sell it. I think about selling this this supply center, but I really need it for the long distance mining. 1,100 gold in the bank, and that is not enough to buy an expansion. Saboteurs take out the command center, though. This could be big. If they get this advanced factory, that's gonna stop Overlord production, and they got it. It was only one sticky grenade away, so hero saboteurs right there. I wonder if my opponent is as broke as I am now. My teammate's doing pretty well. He actually ended up taking a third base at the top. I'm a little low on money. I almost have enough to buy, and that's it. My opponent was broke. That was all he had, so good game. Well, that's going to do it for the Command & Conquer recap here. Thank you all for watching, and I wish everyone the best of futures. Take care.